Hey bro, can you tell me if I'm a complete novice or late novice based on my strength? These are my stats. Bench 185 to 191 RM. I bench 180 for five. So I would immediately say if you're benching 185, 184.5, your 1 RM is not 185. But anyway, squat. Now, okay, but then he says 130 kilograms. So it seems like he switched to kilograms for squat for some reason. 130 kilograms, one
Or
arm
maybe he was
estimation.
benching 180
Well, no, because then he
kilos.
says overhead press 110 pounds, 110 pounds by five. Dumbbell rows 100 pounds for 15 reps. Okay. Deadlift 140 to 150 kilograms, low handle trap bar. I don't know why the upper body lifts are in pounds and the lower body lifts are in kilograms, but that's
Yeah,
interesting. So, do you want me to read those back at all, or if I talk about it, I guess then maybe that'll remind you of the specific numbers?
yeah. Let's do it that way.
Okay. So, obviously, this is going to depend a lot on your how long you've been lifting, but then also how your genetics are, and because again, I would say somebody being novice, intermediate, or advanced is should be relative to their potential, which you're not really going to know, right? But you could be advanced and max out at a 275 bench press, and but maybe you're a 130 pound lifter and you're just super light and super short, and somebody else that could be their beginning weight. So that's a huge factor. Obviously, gender, this is a man, but gender is, very, very significant there as well. But I'm just going to assume you're quote unquote normal weight. You're probably, let's say 150 to 180 or something. If you're benching 180 for five, I would definitely not say that's a complete novice. I would actually say for some people that's intermediate level strength. Again, I'm assuming you have decent form here and all of that. Squatting, I mean, if it's kilograms, if it's a 120 kilograms for five, I would say again, that's definitely not novice strength. I would say that that's intermediate for a lot of people. Overhead press, 110 pounds for five. Again, I would put you at like big, like early intermediate for that. And then the dumbbell rows, I would have to imagine that these are you're really slinging the weight here because if you're doing 100-pound dumbbells for 15 reps, like
Yeah,
I'm imagining this is like a croc rows kind of a thing. Like I don't think I could strict row 100 pounds for 15 reps. I don't think like if I was like
no way.
really, really strict, I
I
don't think I
definitely
could
wouldn't.
do that. So I those I don't know if that's a typo or maybe he means
Oh, like one
50
hand
pound
at a time, right?
dumbbells.
So you're holding on to something with
Right.
the other hand like that. Okay.
Right. But maybe he means 50-pound dumbbells. So he's counting it as 100 pounds. That would make a lot more sense.
Oh,
Like if he's doing
could
both of
be.
them together. Because I do know some people who
Could.
count that with dumbbells. They'll say like their dumbbell bench press and it's like 200 pounds for 10 and they really mean like 100, you know what I mean?
Mm,
So if
yeah.
that's the case, that would make a lot more sense. And then deadlift 140, 150 kilograms. So low 300s with a trap bar. I would say all of these kind of put you fairly in an intermediate category, again, without knowing too much else about you.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's also, I know that this is a bit more controversial, but like, I would say I've seen enough examples where that was the case that like you can also look at sort of where you started. So like how much did you need to progress to get to these points? Because like Andy Bolton with his famous story about like having I think squatted, yeah, 400
Mm.
pounds the first time he stepped into the gym.
Yeah.
So, which, and obviously his ceiling, even my cat pays attention. That's crazy. Which, I mean, that was definitely very, very far from his ceiling because at the end he squatted how much? Like 1,000 pounds or something like that? Or that was just his deadlift?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, 600 pounds? I don't know. No, definitely more than 600 pounds. So yeah, like look at how much you needed to progress to get to this point, and also assuming that your training is reasonably well set up, how fast you're able to progress now. So if you can pretty much go from 180 for five to 185 for five and go like that week to week, then yeah, I mean, you're definitely not any more advanced than an intermediate or maybe even in the earlier stages of the intermediate phase. So that's kind of another good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Cool.
Agree.
All right, so we're going to talk about a few more recent things here, like my dieting down, because I haven't really made a video on it specifically, and then some of the comments with the Mike Israetel video. So I thought that one was funny just because, like, I can't speak from experience and say that I know how to grow a like million subscriber channel, but I will say I feel like it must be very difficult, but at the same time, if you are willing to just feed into the algorithm, it seems like it wouldn't be terribly hard to, I don't want to say a million because that's pretty rare, but not terribly hard to get traction. Like, so one of the podcasts that I really enjoy that I just know won't get a lot of views is with this guy, Nick Verhoeven. I've had on twice now. And one of the things I said to him, I was very impressed with his channel growth because there's just no drama. It's just like great scientific information on longevity and health and all that stuff versus, maybe another channel that is more drama related. But so I'm very impressed with anybody who can really grow their channel organically and then not just, crazy thumbnails and all that. But I know somebody like Renaissance Periodization, Mike Israetel, has talked about how that's made a huge difference for them in their platform. And it's a business. So I know some people are commenting saying, oh man, he's lost his way and it's all this. But at the end of the day, Mike Israetel is not on here to be your friend. He's on here to create a business and ultimately, hopefully, still provide good information. But to me, it just makes sense that he's going to do what gets positive feedback. And I just look at my last two videos, and they were both, you know, catchy titles, somewhat controversial topics, thumbnails related to Mike Israetel and things he said, and it's got 5 or 6 times the views of anything else I've gotten. So again, I don't know how that would scale necessarily, but it sure seems like if you just kind of talk about trending topics and use a good thumbnail, it just happens like pretty dependably. So
Yeah, it's. And I think just want to interject just because I don't know if later is that this is still going to be relevant, but I
yeah,
think that with someone like Mike, I think it's and for me personally, it's also harder to watch people like him engage in that sort of strategy for growing their channel because I think that he is one of those people that just because of the way the evidence-based fitness little circle tends to work, he he made a lot of us believe or think, and not even completely unrightfully so, that he is here in part because he is our friend, right?
mhm,
So, and not in terms of like yours and mine, but like everybody's who is watching his content. Like I'm just Mike. Like I'm one of you. Yeah, I'm more jacked and whatever. Like do certain things that you might not be doing, and of course we live different lives. But like don't hype me up. I'm not this. I'm not one of these celebrities who is like living in a different universe compared to you. Like, no, I'm Mike who goes with his Crocs to the gym,
right.
and where I'm saying it's not even completely unrightfully so that we would feel that way is because, I mean, how big was your channel when you first got him on? How big was mine? Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure that I was under 1,000 subscribers.
Right.
Maybe you were as well. And that's what he did for many years. Like, I'm I'm sure that now he wouldn't do that simply because he doesn't have the time, and I mean he has to set priorities,
Sure.
and so it's. I think now a lot of us are in this sort of weird phase with someone like him, where like we still remember the times because it was, I mean, just like a year ago or so,
Yeah, right.
things were still like quite different around him. Like the growth and as far as like his ascension to like a different sphere of public figures is very very like exponentially. It just happened like from one day to the next. Things are like changing quite rapidly for him. But for us, like it was so recent that he was still just Mike. That it's just kind of a very weird like mindset that I find myself in when I see him now, like yeah, sitting at the same table as like someone like a Greg Doucette, even though like they're still quite different, but
Right.
like kind of have to view them in terms of like similar levels of fame and all.
Yeah, no, I always appreciate when people can be down to earth. And I don't, like I don't like to talk about people too much generally if they're not there. If it's something like this, obviously, we commented on or like, the guy who attacked Jeff Nippert and everything like that. But if it's anything critical, I usually like to do with the person being there because I don't know, just generally, I think that's the best way to go about it. But with Mike, I think some people could see the content and be like, oh, you have this problem with Mike. And I don't have any problem with Mike. I think some of the stuff Mike says, I definitely disagree with, but I don't know if there's almost anybody who I don't disagree with some things that they say. So I see your standpoint of it where it's like, hey, they've kind of ascended this thing. I think that it just naturally, though, happens where the busier you get, you're just not going to be able to acquiesce to every request that comes your way. It's just impossible. And
Yeah.
the reality is, if you think about why somebody comes on a podcast, it's generally either one, they like the person, or two, they get something out of it, right? So, I mean, you think of like a huge example that just happened, like Donald Trump was just on Joe Rogan's podcast. Well, obviously,
Really? I
yeah,
totally missed
yeah,
that.
yeah, that just
Oh my
happened.
God.
So, and it's like, so why would he do that? Is it because he just loves Joe Rogan so much, or is it because he gets something in this case, like 50 million views on it and it brings attention to it? Of course, that's a huge reason why anybody goes on anybody's podcast. And so, I think for somebody like Mike, related to what you were saying, I think earlier it was more, hey, I'm getting my name out there, but also like I like these people, I'm willing to do it, like go on our podcast when they were smaller and whatnot. Uh, Versus now, I think he's probably just so busy that he could just not do that. It's
Yeah,
understandable
yeah, yeah.
that he
Absolutely.
couldn't do it. And so now it's just about people he would like. So he still would be on, let's say, Steve Hall's podcast because he actually is friends with Steve Hall and likes him, but he couldn't just be on Joe Schmo's podcast, who has 1,000 viewers on average, because it just doesn't make sense for him. But
Yeah, yeah.
he would gladly go on Joe Rogan's podcast, for example. This is something I even actually I had some people who early on in the channel before I had any growth, I respected it if they were just like, hey, like I don't have the time for it right now rather than say, for example, oh yeah, let's do it and then ghost. Like I really, really disrespect ghosting and not following through with what you say you're going to do. That's like a huge life pet peeve of mine. So that I always like really didn't like. But if somebody just said, hey, I just don't have the time, it's like, hey man, I get it. Like, because I for a while would be requested to be on people's podcasts and I would just do all of them when possible because it's like, hey, people did it for me and now like I want to give that back, and I still do try to do that, and I've been on obviously like even smaller channels, but I've also had to allow myself to just say no at times where it's like, man, like I don't know the person, they're just getting started, and if I can make it work, awesome, but I'm very busy right now with a lot of different things, and I just can't necessarily spend 2 hours talking to somebody I don't know. And the reality is it's not meant to be a transactional thing, but if Mike Israetel goes on, Dr. Mike, that big podcast, that guy,
Hmm.
that's a huge benefit to Mike Israetel because he's getting so
Yeah.
many eyes that never would have gotten there. So it's not like he's just doing that out of kind of his heart. And while I hate to have it be transactional, to some degree, you have to be realistic about that stuff. And this is his business. And so it makes sense for him to do that. And even like somebody like with you, Abel, like at your channel size, I don't think you could necessarily go on every potential podcast, but if you were super busy and Joe Rogan was like, hey, Abel, you want to be on the podcast? You would find a way to fly to Joe Rogan and be on his podcast, right? Like you would just do
Oh,
that. So,
absolutely.
so
Uh,
I think sometimes people get a little bit upset about what in reality is a rational business decision.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that the so what I was more so actually referring to with how it's difficult to view Mike in the position that he's in now. Okay, basically, I got into a huge ramble, and it was one of those where midway through the monologue, I realized that this is just a gigantic, incoherent mess, and I tried to course correct midway through, but then it was too late, and I just got myself into an even bigger mess. So basically, what I attempted to say here was that when you're closer with someone, you're naturally more critical of anything that you perceive to be sketchy or maybe not up to the person's standards in terms of ethics, maybe even. So for example, if I see Greg Doucette doing some sketchy thing on YouTube, it wouldn't faze me much because he is too far removed from my world. If I saw my best friend do something sketchy, it would be like, damn man, like you
left our little cocoon, which might have been more boring, but this was the little safe place where these sorts of sketchy things just wouldn't happen. So I would be like, what happened? I would feel inclined to say something about it. And so in Mike's case, it was sort of the fact that even though he was of a much greater stature in the industry than, say, me at all times in the time frame that I'd known him, he always acted like he was just one of us, like a dude who likes cracking jokes and likes lifting and just happens to know a lot. Now, of course, the reality is he was never truly one of us. We were moving in different spheres and at different elevations, I suppose, in the industry. And now all of a sudden he is in the superstar league with many of its good sides and some of its bad sides. The good sides, of course, include things like him appearing on much bigger platforms, which is awesome. But then some of the negatives include some of the marketing strategies and some of the claims that would resemble those that earlier on he would have shit on together with us. And so because of that perceived closeness, I guess, I almost have the inclination to say something to him like, come on, Mike, like, really, this claim here or this one here? I mean, you don't truly mean that, right? Now, the thing is that even if it was any of my business to talk into how he conducts business, which it definitely isn't, even then, at this point, he is just far too big for me to even be in the position where I could say something like that, which is a very strange thing to experience from this side of the fence. So yeah, basically I attempted to say something like that with my monologue, and it definitely didn't go as I planned it.
So where are you sitting at weight-wise now?
Weight-wise, where I'm sitting at? Yeah, like just measured the other day, like 92, 93.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was weird. Like the last couple of cuts I've done, I was kind of like, oh, okay, that went easier than expected. And the last one, so I cut in 2020, best cut ever, 2021, easier cut, but not as good of an end result. And then I didn't really cut 2022, and in 2023, I kind of bulked up. That's when I was 215. So 2024 was mostly dieting from like January to September. It's going slow, and it was kind of strange because I was pretty much force feeding up to 215, and the actual calorie amount wasn't that high. I was averaging about 3,600 calories, but it was just beyond where my body wanted to be. And so getting down to 205 happened almost immediately. But what was interesting was similar to in 2021, I was like, all right, I'm just going to get to 190, and I don't really have a reason to go below that. But for health reasons, I just thought like being 20 to 25 pounds lighter would be good. And that's just going to be my new kind of set point around there. And I got there with like basically like no strength loss, no real issues at all. So I was like, all right, like I'll go to 185, but only with the intention to eventually kind of creep back up to 190. Like I'll just give myself a little bit of leeway. Anyway, lo and behold, I just like kind of kept going. And eventually I got down to sub 180, which I haven't been in years, like years and years. And I was very pleased with the strength retention and everything. I mean, obviously on the long standing exercises, there's a little bit of a reduction, like my chest supported rows are noticeably down, and some of the curls are now down. But again, I mean, we're talking like a few reps with the same weight, nothing super dramatic. The problem is that I mentioned this with Alex Leonidas is I'm not doing like a barbell bench press or a standing overhead press anymore. So those exercises, it's kind of hard to say. Like I probably would have lost more from those if I was doing them.
Yeah.
One of the nice things with the home gym is it's kind of giving me like a reset on these things. So I just can kind of focus on the exercises and not like the ego necessarily as much. And so that's kind of what I've been doing. But now what I've been most surprised about, so the big surprise was cutting down and that I just kind of kept going without too much effort. And I think the biggest thing is just hunger wasn't there as much. Like I really just think appetite is such a huge factor for where people settle.
At
And
all? Like even during the cut itself?
so I'm not saying I was never hungry. I'm saying it wasn't anything like I was expecting before. So the biggest reasons that I would end diets before were typically the strength loss and eventually the hunger. I never really let hunger stop me, but it was just one more point where like when I would lose strength, it would just drive me so much crazy. And then that probably combined with the hunger, I was like, like just forget this. Um, and again, it wasn't, I wouldn't consider anything with willpower because I thankfully don't really have much of an issue there. It was just I can't stand to lose the strength that I've worked so hard to gain, which is
Mm.
why I'm impressed with somebody like Alex Leonidas talking about losing 100 pounds on his bench press. Like I guess if I had a competition I was going to do where you just have to keep pushing, that would be one thing. but mentally, I just don't know if I could
Yeah.
take that.
Yeah.
So
There.
yeah, it's tough. So anyway, so once I got down to like 185, I did start losing a little bit more, and the hunger in that last month was clearly ramped up, but it was at the level where I would normally be a few months into a diet, not at the end of a diet. Because typically at the end of the diet, I mean, I'm just like, just ravenous. So it was just,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it was just an age thing. There was even times where I was almost a little concerned, like, why am I not hungry? Like, is something else going on? It was a little bit strange, to be honest. But I was like, well, again, strength has been pretty good. I'm not saying I'm as strong as I was at 215, but it's actually pretty close. And it looks a lot better in pictures, obviously. So like, on Instagram, you're like, oh my God, like, what have you been doing? You looked like crazy. And of course, in person, as I always talk about, it's completely the opposite, right? My family is saying like, you really can't lose any more weight. You look like really skinny. My assistant's saying how like, whatever. It just differences in how I'm looking and everything. So um,
Yeah.
it's always funny to see that discrepancy.
So how long did it take the whole thing again?
Oh, and let me just, before I answer that, just say that what would even surprise me even more was the lack of gain on the way up. So when I finished, we went on a vacation for a week. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna finish. I'm like, maybe I'll hit 182 for the vacation. Like maybe I'll peak down there. And I ended up hitting below that, like 181. And then, or 180.4, I think was what it was. And then I figured, okay, I'm gonna eat whatever I want on the trip, which in reality is probably gonna be about 4,000 calories a day. That's a pretty big jump for 6 days straight. And I
Yeah.
came back at, I think, 185, 186. And then within 2 weeks, I was down sub 180. And I just was very surprised. I mean, and the only significant difference is I'm doing cardio 4 days a week instead of two. But I mean, really, how many net calories are you burning from that compared to when you're doing two? I mean, just not a lot, right? There's so much evidence that that cardio doesn't do much. My past
Yeah.
experiences tell me that that additional cardio doesn't do much. So it's just very surprising. I was even lower on Friday. That was kind of an unusual low. But even this morning, I woke up at 180.6 after 4,700 calories on Friday and 2,700 calories yesterday. So it's just odd. And I don't, like I said, I want to eat more. I do also think the low saturated fat experiment is part of it because by limiting things like the cheeses and the fattier meats, I that desire to just overeat on low saturated fat foods is not there as much. I do think that's a factor.
Yeah.
So I always just kind of intended, all right, I'm going to get back up to, and kind of live at 185 to 190. But given how this has been, I think I might just stay here and just 180 to 185, creep up a little bit with the holidays, but it hasn't been that hard. I just have to imagine it's a little bit healthier for me. So between that and everything else. But to answer your question, I started at the end of January. February was when I got really sick. That's when I made that video on like I had strep and flu. It was just like this awful period. And I really tried to keep my weight up actually during that time, but I still ended up dropping a few pounds. And then I finished at the beginning of September. So it was about an 8 month cut. I'm getting over
I mean,
30
that's
pounds.
yeah, that is like contest prep territory almost. I
Yeah.
mean, not almost, like time wise it is there. It's just and what would you say like so I saw your pictures, although most of them have been like kind of small. So where would you guess your body fat is?
Easily 5% if I'm going by the Kino body method.
Yeah,
So I
but
would
that
say, and actually, you know what? Since this half will probably go in your channel, I'll talk about something else related to that. That'll be good because I think I'm going to discuss it with Jeffrey Schofield when he's on my podcast next. But I would say, realistically, man, if I want to be brutally honest, I still think a DEXA would probably. I think, and again, we know we've seen some very big issues with DEXA scans, but I
yeah.
would not be surprised if I was still over 10%. And that's one of the humbling things about this is it's just because you like some of these guys, I see them, walking around with just, I mean, just quote unquote washboard abs and just diced. And I just think, man, I'm probably at least 10 pounds away. Like if I want to be like contest lean, I think I'm at least 15 pounds away. And that is, I would say, humbling, to think about how light some of these guys get, and also how big some of these guys really are then in reality. Like somebody like a Steve Hall, I think he just competed. What was he, like 170 or something in his last competition or something like that?
Uh, was he that big?
Maybe not. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
misremembering, but I thought it was something like that. But either way, so his pictures of him at 177 are for sure leaner than I would be at 177, and he's like 3 inches shorter than I am. So, it really makes you think about how big some of these guys are, and they don't seem like, remember like Kevin Heinesty, I've had him on the podcast like
Hmm.
years ago. And I've talked about this as an example. It's like, yeah, we kind of looked like a general similar size, but in reality, I was, like 8% body fat higher than he was. So to be the same leanness, it's just, and that's on the other side of that. That's why you get some of these guys who think that they're so big and they're 25% body fat. And it's just
Yeah.
like, it's just a different world.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this whole like how lean you are in reality, it's it's not even so much something that you're going to be able to judge by looking at others, but you really need to experience it on your own body to where like you just learn how much more potential there is still to lose fat. And it's like when you feel like, okay, man, like anywhere I'm reaching, like I just cannot pinch anything, everything feels like this.
Hmm.
And then you still lose like I don't know, 7 pounds, 10 pounds, and
Yeah,
it's
right.
you don't even really see anything changing. And it's like, well, okay, because like I never actually consider these weird areas where I could still be losing fat. Which is complete side note, but I actually think that like natural bodybuilding, like I feel like the aesthetics price that they're paying for getting some more detail in like on the glutes, let's say, like on the net balance is just so not worth it.
Yeah.
Like all that happens to the totality of your physique is actually you just end up looking worse pretty much everywhere. But okay, finally you have that final mark that was
Yeah.
not there yet on your glutes. So yeah, I mean, it could be that you would still measure over 10%. And yeah, but actually, like if you were to get to like a legitimate 8% or something, like the things that actually matter to like most of us, so your abs and back definition, whatever, like all of those might not even change that significantly. It's just like you would be like crazy shredded on your hamstrings now as
Right.
well. Maybe not crazy shredded at 8%, but like yeah, like much more detail than now.
Yeah,
Like that
I
would be the difference.
agree. And it's, this is where, the Mike Israetel video was like that naturals are coping. So this could also be considered a cope by some people, but I just really do believe that, again, because of the experience of in person versus pictures. So I think for the most part, the leaner you get, the better you get to look at pictures, almost always. And again, if you are competing in bodybuilding, I totally understand that. But I'll just tell you, like, if somebody, and of course, it depends on the amount of muscle mass you have too. So if I had the genetics for 15 pounds more muscle mass, then I think you could afford to get leaner before people start commenting on that, right? Before people, like, I don't think somebody like Brian DaCosta, number one natural bodybuilder, I don't think he ever really starts looking worse and worse the leaner he gets because he's got so much muscle. Nobody's going to look and be like, oh, wow, you just look super skinny anorexic now. Versus
Yeah.
maybe somebody 20 pounds lighter like Eric Helms. He does start getting those comments at the very end. And then somebody like me, who's even like another 10, 15 pounds less than Eric potentially, then you'd really start getting that. So, I think for a given weight, again, I'm 6'1". So how am I going to look at 160, 165 pounds? It's not going to be a great look. Like it's just going to look generally bad, even with like tight clothes and whatnot. I just don't think that's a favorable look. So I do think the amount of muscle mass obviously plays in there. And like I don't want to like hate on anybody, but I can think of specific natural bodybuilders who I see pictures of them on stage, and it's like, man, I appreciate how hard you worked to get there, and it's awesome, but I would not want to look like that. Like I just really like to me it's not even like that, oh, that looks cool kind of a thing. It's just like, wow, like that just looks bad. And again, like I hate, like I obviously wouldn't like name, I want to take away from anybody's hard work. But if the goal of this is, hey, I want to be better than next like last year and I want to compete, cool. I totally get it. You're taking yourself to new heights. There's many reasons I could see that. But if you're like, hey, I just want to look really good, there's a point where I just think it just starts to look worse. And like I'm kind of in that area sub 180 where again, like I get more negative comments than anything, you know? So there's a point where I think it can be kind of problematic. Like I feel hunger wise, I could cut another 10 pounds. I'm not doing it because I actually think it will look worse on the whole.
Yeah, it's actually like it's weird how the mindset can flip on the way down. And like I think like now if I look back at the times when I did my photo shoot, except for a couple of pictures that I do like, and like a lot of those featured in my thumbnails and whatever. But even on those, I mean, borderline. Like some of them I actually still like, but for the most part, I got pictures from that period, I just don't like the look, and at times I even have to like kind of cringe
Mm.
because I just look underfed more than anything. Like that's my first reaction. And but I do know that at the time it was, I mean, I sort of had like a different relationship with my body, not in the sense that I was like obsessing over it so much. I was, but I mean, probably I do now still compared to the average person. But it was more so that I didn't look at it in terms of like, okay, objectively how good this looks. I was more so just, wow, like every day that I managed to like suffer through is like getting me one step closer. And by the time I was done, it was more like looking in the mirror was more so just like looking this work of art, even if it's
Mm.
not the prettiest one, but I just knew how much work went into this. And it was almost like, man, I just really don't want to let this go
Yeah,
because,
sure.
I mean, you know, it's a one-time decision and a really quick like feeding process to undo this. But I know how long it took and how much struggle it took to actually get here. I mean, it's good that you don't have that experience then, like it was surprisingly easy. But I mean, still, if you think about it, like, I mean, 8 months, like that's, you know, it's not something that you just do casually.
No, no, it wasn't like a casual thing. It just wasn't, it didn't take an insane amount of effort. And again, like the effort, like what makes a diet hard? And typically it's the fact that like you're hungry and fatigued. Those are like the two big things, right? And it messes with your sleep, but that leads to fatigue, right? The strength
Yeah.
loss can suck, but that often isn't until the very end if you do things properly. And so when dieting's hard, it's you're always hungry. And I'm just saying I wasn't as hungry as I used to be to the point that, like I said, it was almost there was like a 5 to 10% of me that was a little bit concerned, like, why am I not hungry compared to normally in the past having like crazy appetite? But I really think that
Yeah.
hunger is a huge factor there. So it definitely, I wouldn't say it was easy, but I'm glad to see like the food focus is there as I sit here even now, like 180, 182, let's say this morning, or no, sorry, 180.6 this morning, but 182.2 yesterday. So, um, it's there, but it's just not anything like in the past. So, I've been pretty happy with it. I'll probably just hover around here. I don't really have much. I'm interested to see like, okay, if I mess with volume and everything at this weight, do I do anything? But kind of the same way that Steve Hall and Eric Helms and a few other people have just kind of said, hey, you know what? I'm just going to not go above like 12 to 15%. Like that's kind of where I'm going to be at this point. I don't, I just, I can't see a reason that I'm ever going to be above 200 pounds again. Like just from a health standpoint, from a results standpoint, from all of it, I just think most of my life will be now 180 to 190. Could maybe see creeping up over 190s and maybe creeping under below 180s for like a special occasion. But I think mostly I'll be in that kind of range.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I'm kind of like that with the 100 kilo mark, like 220 mark, where,
Mm.
I mean, the funny thing is that if I now lose like 10, 15 pounds or something, probably I'm going to be like, let's say if I look back at this recording, I'm going to say like, oh man, like how chubby your face was. But, you know, I see myself every day. So I don't notice these little changes that much. But I do know that I can slip into that very easily because I don't know, I just seem to have like some inverse body dysmorphia. The fatter I get, I just see myself somehow much better looking than what I actually am. Because I remember how I saw myself when I was up at like 105 or something. I don't know what the peak weight was exactly now, but probably now I'm getting to that point where like, yeah, like if I could diet back down a little bit, but then I'm like, I'm totally rocking it. Like, I don't know what's the issue.
Yeah.
Uh, but at
No,
the same
it's
time,
amazing
like,
how quickly you can adapt to it too. I always find that
yeah,
very fascinating because honestly, when I was 210, I was, and I really agree with this. I was holding it better than past years. And as you get older, your face tends to be a little slimmer. You don't hold as much fat there. So I think that was part of it.
mm,
And so I was holding 210 like pretty well, and I didn't get any negative comments about it. And I was like, this is much better than previous 210s. And I do think it was a little bit better than previous 210s. But now I look at those pictures and I'm like, man, I was so soft. Like I was so soft. And at least, for me, I mean, I still had a 4 pack, but it was soft. And now, like I'm dieting down. I'm like, wow, like, I'm like ab veins and just like resting abs and all these things. And now it's just kind of like normal. And if I look back at old pictures of my face, I'm like, oh wow, like look at that chunky face. Like it's just very different.
yeah. Yeah, I actually wondered about like, could I lose enough muscle? Like, if I just let myself get completely out of shape, then could I get to the point again where I would see Brad Pitt in Troy as impressive as I saw him when I was a kid?
Oh yeah.
Because like because like on people like that is where I can like actually measure how much my perception is warped now. Because like Brad Pitt in Troy, I mean I have actually a hard time to find him impressive by like fitness standards. So like obviously if I saw a guy like that on the beach, like I would definitely notice that. But
Yeah,
like
yeah.
other than the fact that he's really lean, I just really don't see him particularly impressive. But but could I if I lost, like I don't know, most of the muscle that I gained through my training? It could be because it definitely happens with your own pictures, as you're saying. Like now I find pictures of mine from a couple of kilos ago when I was that much leaner, like much more impressive than I thought of them then. So who
I'm
knows?
trying to find pictures of him from Troy
He
that
has like
aren't
a couple of angles
photoshopped.
in the movie where he looks like very impressive, but like for the most part in that tent scene, he, yeah, like there's that one picture where if anybody is watching wants to do some Googling, where he's like tying his thing behind his back. Oh no, actually this one where he's tying it in the front, where he looks, I'll drop it over to you. I don't know if you can even open it now, but so I think this snapshot is the most impressive of him in the whole scene where he's shirtless.
Where is it?
I dropped it to you on
Oh,
WhatsApp. If
I mean, yeah, man. I don't know if I look much better than that now. So,
no, but like this is his best snapshot, like where he's just standing there, like doing his thing. I mean, there are seeing like
I wonder how
little
much he actually
frames where.
weighs.
So I never found info on that, but I would guess that at like 5'11" or so. I mean, what would you think? I would guess he's somewhere between 165 and 175.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But I mean, he's definitely one of the more impressive transformation case studies amongst famous people.
For
Like
sure.
he, and I mean, he is someone who has been in pretty good shape his whole life, basically.
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
he probably even did it natural.
Cool, man. Well, this is good timing because I've got 10% better. Oh, no, actually, 24% must be. It's weird. You ever see it's like 24 or higher percentage than you'd expect, but then it's like 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
Be better. Anyway, cool. So, all right, man. So we got some Q&A, just some riffing here, some fitness drama. Always going to get the views there. So this will be on your channel.
Yeah.
So you can find me, Brains and Gains Podcast, Dave_Maconi on Instagram, and comment down below to get Abel back into the fitness industry because he hasn't been posting anything.
Hey, I posted last week or
Did you
something.
post, the video or the on Instagram? Nothing on
Oh, on
Instagram.
Instagram? Nah, yeah, Instagram. I still have PTSD.
Yes, I understand. Cool, man.